The new administration has set a blistering pace this year, attempting to tackle a seemingly endless array of major policy initiatives. The three largest seem to have been the economy through the Recovery Act, healthcare reform, and energy and climate change, which we're going to talk about today. Today's forum does focus on energy, and we're going to hear from a great group of speakers. Christina will bring us up to speed on what has been happening legislatively with respect to energy research funding and priorities. And it's clear from Washington and from the interest here on campus that energy research has emerged as a hot topic. There are significant opportunities for this sort of research, and Vanderbilt is positioning itself to take advantage of it. Now, it's my great privilege to introduce our panel, and I'm going to start with someone who really needs no introduction, Camilla Benbow. But I will say a few words about Camilla by way of explanation for her participation on this panel. As you all know, of course, Dean Benbow is Patricia Rhodes Hart Dean of Education and Human Development at Vanderbilt, Peabody College, the #1 educational college in the country. She's held this position since 1998. She's an educational psychologist and has focused her scholarly work on gifted education and the development of mathematical talent. In 2006, she was nominated by President Bush and confirmed by the Senate to serve on the National Science Board, which oversees the National Science Foundation. She currently serves on the Executive Committee of the NSB. She has also recently served on the National Science Board Task Force on Sustainable Energy, which examined the role of the U.S. government in addressing the science and engineering challenges related to development of sustainable energy. The task force provided some recommendations to the President and Congress regarding a nationally coordinated science and engineering research and education initiative on sustainable energy, with specific guidance on the role of the NSS in such an initiative. That report was released at the end of August, and there are some copies on the table as you leave, or maybe some of you got picked up one as you came in. Camilla is here to share with us the report's recommendations. And following Camilla's presentation, Christina, as I said, will brief us on what is going on in Washington in this area. And then finally, we are thrilled to be joined today by Ryan Gooch. Ryan is the Director of Energy Policy in the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. As Director of Energy Policy, Ryan oversees all energy-related initiatives at ECD. In addition to managing the State Energy Office and its programs, his responsibilities include working closely with the Governor's Office and other cabinet level state energy agencies on a variety of energy-related issues, including the Governor's Task Force on Energy Policy and the Governor's Task Force on Alternative Fuels. The Energy Policy Office is charged with developing state policy to improve energy efficiency and conservation, expand the availability and use of alternative fuels and renewable energy sources, and promote the development of Tennessee's clean energy technology sector. Now, Ryan has a good deal more on his resume, but he told me I only needed to read that first paragraph. So I will take you up on that, Ryan. And again, thank you for being here with us today. Now, before we get started, I just want to stress, as always, that we hope that this is a starting point, that we want to hear from you. We've left plenty of time for questions, and we look forward to your questions and to the conversation that will come out. Again, thank you for being here. And Dean Benbow, the stage is yours.
I appreciate being here, and many of you probably, when you walked in, were wondering, why is Camilla on this panel, you know, Dean of Education, and how does this work? But I hope after the introduction that you might have connected the dots about why I might be reporting out on this issue. And I have to say that, you know, I love working with gifted children, but sustainable energy has become a passion of mine. It's a real worry. And so when the National Science Board decided to take up this topic, I was quick to raise my hand and volunteer. And I'm going to have to say, boy, did I learn a lot. Now, you know, we have to realize we started this about 2 years ago, and a lot has changed in the last 2 years. So many of the things that I will be presenting today, you might have actually heard about by now, but when we first learned about them, it seemed news, but now it's being discussed in the newspapers all the time. But really 2 years ago, this was not a topic that was discussed much. So let me go in and kind of talk about our report, Building a Sustainable Energy Future. And let me just say that, okay, good. The National Science Board was established by Congress in 1950. And it really has two important roles. The first role is to establish policies for the National Science Foundation, and we oversee all the major grants. So if a grant is more than $5 million, the board reviews it and approves it. We're trying to raise that limit because there's an awful lot of grants that are more than $5 million. But also what people don't realize, although they realize that we oversee the National Science Board, and it's a very unique, no other agency quite has a board like that, we also are an independent body of advisors to both the President and Congress on national policy issues related to science and engineering, research, and education. I think that last part, when you talk about math, science, education, you might understand why I might have been appointed, because I work in math, science, education with talented youth, a natural fit for them. But many people do not realize that we do provide that advice to the President and Congress, and we are often sending reports and letters to them. Now, the National Science Board has produced many reports over the years, and we just are coming out with one on cost sharing, as you've learned about. So it's another issue that we've gotten into, is how do we do adequate cost sharing? And I've heard an earful about that, and I've been trying to communicate that to my fellow board members, not all of whom work at universities. Anyway, the Task Force on Sustainable Energy was started in October 2007, and our purpose was to examine the role of the U.S. government in addressing the science and engineering challenges related to the development of sustainable energy. This task force was charged to provide recommendations to the President and Congress with specific guidance to the National Science Foundation. And as we go through and you see our recommendations, you can see some of them are already being implemented, which makes me feel good. We conducted 3 roundtable discussions to collect information. One was in Washington, D.C., one was in Golden, Colorado, and in Berkeley, California, where actually the Secretary of Energy, Hsu, addressed us. So it was kind of nice that I got to meet Hsu before he became really famous. Anyway, and we got our report approved in May, and as you can know, it was released in August. So what is the definition of sustainable energy? We use the term rather broadly in our report to include sustainable and clean energy sources that have minimal greenhouse gas emissions, can be developed within the United States, and is characterized as affordable, safe, and available in sufficient quantity to enable continued economic and social development. We identified 3 drivers for a sustainable energy future. The need to promote national and economic security by increasing U.S. energy independence. Many people didn't realize how this impacts our national security, but it surely does. Second, it is critical to enhance environmental stewardship and reduce energy and carbon intensity. And third, there is an immense opportunity to generate continued economic growth through innovation in energy technology and increases in green jobs. That has been talked a lot about lately, so you may not think this is news, but in October 2007, that was not a topic of conversation. When we came to 6 recommendations or findings when we did our report, first, a key finding is that there's a comprehensive, coordinated federal strategy is required for sustainable energy research, policies, and education. Second finding was that the level both of private and federal support for sustainable energy R&D is inadequate to meet the scale, scope, and urgency of the challenges to achieve sustainable energy solutions. Remember, this was before today's announcements of $3.5 billion in grants. But the U.S. energy economy is carbon intensive and does not adequately value the environment as a public good. Something we've talked about, that when we think about our energy costs, we don't pay for the damage that is caused by using the types of energy, like oil, that we use. Human capital development in the sustainable energy sector is vital to the discovery of sustainable energy solutions and to achievement and maintenance of a sustainable energy economy. Another finding is that limited international engagement and collaboration on sustainable energy solutions are inhibiting progress towards critical multilateral and bilateral actions, and a coordinated strategy is needed. And finally, the sixth finding was a strong public consensus and support for sustainable energy actions are needed to achieve a national transformation to a sustainable energy economy. I think you've been reading the newspapers and the polls. You can see we're not quite there yet. We have a lot of work to do to get there. Now, in terms of our recommendations, this is our priority recommendation, our top recommendation that came out of the report, which you can pick up at when you leave. The primary recommendation is to develop, clearly defined, and lead a nationally coordinated research development, demonstration, deployment, and education strategy to transform the U.S. energy system to a sustainable energy economy that is far less carbon intensive. In order to lead this coordinated RD3E strategy, the U.S. government should establish a Presidential Sustainable Energy Council to coordinate all federal activities in sustainable energy and provide a leading example by adopting sustainable energy measures throughout the U.S. government. I think you heard a couple of weeks ago that all U.S. government offices are supposed to reduce their energy use, and I think this might be one of those recommendations that have been followed up from here. The next recommendation was increasing the R&D investment. Substantial and continuous investment is needed for all stages along the sustainable energy R&D spectrum. So we need more money to achieve innovation and widespread deployment of sustainable energy technologies, and to facilitate innovation by encouraging investment in research and commercialization of sustainable energy technologies across the economic sector. Again, today, President Obama is releasing $3.5 billion worth of grants to actually do this. So feels like this report is having some traction. In terms of recommendation 3, it's essential to establish policies that facilitate development, commercialization, and deployment of sustainable energy technologies, and accelerate adoption and commercialization of sustainable energy technologies. The fourth recommendation that came out of the report involves supporting education and workforce development. Science and technology education related to sustainable energy at all levels, and workforce training in sustainable energy related fields. This was really where we heard was that from a lot of companies said, we want to do these things, but we can't hire the people with the right skill set. There may be engineers out there, but not the engineers with this skill set. We can't hire the people we need to develop this economy. So this certainly has implications for higher ed. Recommendation 5. The U.S. needs to lead globally by engaging in global cooperation and sustainable energy strategies and reducing barriers to cross-national collaboration. And I'm moving along quickly, but I should keep within my time limit. Recommendation 6 is really to promote public awareness and action. When we were in all these reports, the human element always came up. People do not understand the importance of the issues, what they can do, how they can respond, and we really need to educate the public on this. And yes, we might come up with better gadgets, we might come up with better fuels, we might do all these new engineering stuff, but if it's going to be used appropriately and it's going to be taken to scale, we need the people who know how to use it. And that's always a limiting factor. And I remember when I was on there at the beginning, there was a couple of social scientists, myself, we had all these people who, sorry Ken, who were engineers who kept just looking at the engineering challenges. And we kept saying, what about the people? What about the people? And at the end, this was one of the biggest things that was a revelation, was how important it is to address the human element in this. And it's sort of like drugs. You can certainly develop drugs to help fight diseases, but if the people don't take them appropriately, they don't do much good. It's similar here. But the biggest issue, I think, right now is overcoming the public skepticism in some quarters about global warming. All right. Priority guidance. And we basically told the National Science Foundation, you should increase your funding in research that involves sustainable energy. And as we've seen, and I can say to you, this, as I see the budget development in years coming out for the National Science Foundation, because we budget years ahead and we think about this, clearly this is going to be a priority of the National Science Foundation. They are putting more money into this effort. So at NSF, there will be more opportunities for grants in this area. And there are other things that we asked NSF to do, coordinate sustainable energy activities, to coordinate them better. You have all these directorates at NSF. They sort of talk to each other, but maybe they could coordinate a little bit better, and maybe they could work with other agencies a little bit better too. We really think that there needs to be a systems approach to this rather than everybody tinkering here and there. Let's think about this systematically and get an overall plan and strategy. Strengthen science and engineering partnerships. Again, support education and workforce development. So we really are talking about, are there some granting opportunities that we can, at NSF, that we can support, provide support for in terms of developing the right workforce, and also in terms of a public relations campaign, and promote that public awareness. And this is an old slide. We've already gotten that done. So, but that's it. That is our report. And what I'd like to say is that, in the 2 years, when we began this process, and I will say, the board was very hesitant about using the word global warming, sustainable energy. It was not something that people could talk about across the federal agencies. And it's been a sea change in the last 2 years of what has happened, being something that you could not talk about what the impact was on forests, for example, to one now where, huge amount of investments. You have an energy czar. The government is supposed to lead the way in terms of reducing energy and so on. It's quite a different world. What a difference 2 years makes. And we were just putting out these recommendations at that time, and it's kind of, I guess, gratifying because there are so many reports that are issued that don't go anywhere. And it's kind of nice to be able to see that we did influence policy, that some decisions, now I don't think that it was just our report. I don't really believe that. But what is happening is certainly consistent with this report. So anyway, it was a gratifying task force. I learned a lot, and I do hope that the work will lead to a lot more investment and advancement in sustainable energy. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about, from the congressional perspective, what's been going on primarily this year. Camilla talked about what a sea change we've seen over the last 2 years, and I would say even over the last year, what a difference a year makes, and what a year it's been so far. We have seen a historic election in the midst of a historic economic downturn. And the long list of legislative priorities that this new administration has come in with is rather daunting. Energy and climate change has certainly been among one of the top priorities for this administration. And energy research in particular has gotten a lot of attention this year. So what I'm going to do is sort of a little bit chronologically talk about some of the opportunities that have emerged this year in terms of energy research. And one of the first ones are the Energy Frontier Research Centers, which have been proposed and funded initially in the FY09 appropriations bill, which was actually completed after the Recovery Act, and fall within the purview of the Department of Energy's Office of Science. The idea with EFRCs is that they are virtual centers composed of a set of self-assembled investigators that often span several science and engineering disciplines. Their goal is to address fundamental science questions that must be answered in order to remove roadblocks to transformational energy technologies. The research is use-inspired discovery science, motivated by this specific problem that they're seeking to solve. The funding range for these is between about $2 and $5 million. They're a 5-year award with the possibility of a 5-year renewal. The first round of awards for these EFRCs was announced in August, and $377 million was announced at that when those awards were made. There's 46 of these initial EFRCs. $277 million of the funding actually came from the Recovery Act, with the other remaining $100 million came out of the FY09 process. Peter Cummings here at Vanderbilt is actually a co-PI of one of the EFRCs located at Oak Ridge. And it's not clear right now if there's going to be another round of these competitions. A lot of it depends, of course, on future appropriations. So then I mentioned that some of the EFRCs were funded out of the Recovery Act. Obviously, a lot of, a huge chunk of my time this year has been dedicated to the Recovery Act. It included, as I hope everyone knows, about $20 billion in research funding, including $1.6 billion for DOE's Office of Science and $400 million for ARPAE, which I'll touch on in just a minute. The Office of Science funding in the Recovery Act was largely put towards accelerated construction of scientific facilities, purchasing of instrumentation, upgrades and modernizations at national labs. Oak Ridge received approximately $70 million in Recovery Act funding through DOE Office of Science. It also includes some funding for expanded research support for graduate students, postdocs, and PhDs. In fact, on September 30th, I think it was, the Office of Science announced funding available for new graduate fellowships in science, mathematics, and engineering. Each fellowship will be approximately $50,000 in support per year for 3 years. Applications for those are due the end of November, and there is information on those on DOE's Recovery Act website, which is doe.gov/recovery. There's also been significant DOE Recovery Act funding outside of the Office of Science, and I think Ryan is going to touch on some of that as it relates to the state of Tennessee. So ARPAE. ARPAE is probably the largest source of research funding that was included in the Recovery Act in the Department of Energy. ARPAE came into being initially. It was proposed in the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report, and Science Committee Chairman Bart Gordon from Middle Tennessee was actually one of the earliest and continues to be one of the strongest champions of ARPAE. It was originally authorized in the Competes Act, which I hope everyone is familiar with. The vision for ARPAE it's very similar. The idea is to take DARPA and put it in the Department of Energy, hence the acronym. So they're trying to implement the highly entrepreneurial approach to mission-oriented R&D, ideas sort of to break down some of the barriers, to look at things beyond just discovery science. Project funding for ARPAE, initially they thought it would be could range anywhere from $500,000 all the way up to $10 million. Just over a month ago, the president nominated Arun Majumdar, I'm sure I'm butchering his name, to be the director of ARPAE. He comes out of Berkeley and the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. He was actually confirmed by the Senate last week, so he is just now having the opportunity to start in a fully nominated and approved capacity at ARPAE. ARPAE received $400 million in the Recovery Act. They also received $15 million in the FY09. The $15 million is really for the program management and to get the agency up and running. The $400 million is intended to actually support the research funding. Unfortunately, they did not receive any additional funding in the FY10 bill, which I'll touch on as well in a minute. The feeling is that with the 415, Congress thought that they're good for right now and would revisit it perhaps in the future. So with the $400 million that they got in the Recovery Act, a call for initial proposals was put out earlier this spring. They received over 3,500 initial proposals. They invited approximately 300 of those initial proposals to submit full proposals, and just yesterday they announced 37 actual ARPAE awards. So they went from 3,500 down to 37. there's $151 million that they announced yesterday for these 37 awards, and the average award size is about $4 million. There is the announcement, and the list of awards was put up on DOE's website yesterday. They also, in late August, issued another request for information for future funding opportunities. They're looking for public input on potential programmatic areas and opportunities to overcome technological roadblocks, and responses were due in September. And the idea is that that's going to help them guide their future calls for proposals. So the FY10 appropriations, as if finishing up FY09 and the Recovery Act is not enough, we obviously have to get through the FY10 appropriations process. The new administration waited until mid-May before they released their budget request for FY10. We're almost obviously a month into the new fiscal year, which started on October 1, and perhaps no surprise, Congress has yet to complete work on all of its FY10 bills. That said, the Energy Water Bill, which obviously funds the Department of Energy, has been completed and is waiting for the President's signature. It was sent to him late last week. We expect him to sign it sometime this week. Remarkably, perhaps the last time that the Energy Appropriations Bill was completed in October was the FY 2001 bill. So it's sort of a new feeling for the Department of Energy to get their budget completed this early. Overall, the DOE Office of Science is slated for a modest $130 million increase over the FY09 level to about $4.9 billion, which is pretty much equal to what the administration had requested and is in line with the authorization levels proposed in the Competes Act. This year we saw a long list of new initiatives proposed by Energy Secretary Chu in the DOE budget request. Probably the biggest one and the one that's gotten the most attention have been the energy innovation hubs. The administration proposed to launch 8 hubs in these areas listed up here. Secretary Chu has identified these problems as presenting the most critical barriers to achieving national energy and climate goals, and they were one of the Secretary's main priorities that he highlighted in all of the testimony that he gave before Congress. The intent was for each hub to focus on a single topic, integrating in a single institution work spanning from basic research through engineering development through commercialization. Each hub would comprise a highly collaborative team bringing together top talent from industry, from academia, from the national labs, and other nonprofits that would allow each hub to become a world-leading R&D center in its area. The administration proposed funding each hub at $25 million a year for a 5-year term with an additional $10 million in startup funds. There would be one opportunity for a 5-year renewal for each hub. Hubs differ from other DOE-funded projects such as ARPAE and EFRCs by having a larger scale and duration with a stronger focus on results that will support multiple players as they pursue solutions to tough problems. There's really a focus on an interdisciplinary approach, breaking down some of the administrative barriers and providing adequate resources so that folks can really dive into some of these issues. Congress's response to the hubs I would describe as lukewarm at best. I think that the department underestimated just how much they needed to sell the Congress and in particular appropriators on this new concept. I think the department was hampered by the fact that they did not have all of their political appointees in place. They still do not have all of them in place, and perhaps did not have as much guidance and of the homework done as perhaps they might have had otherwise. Nonetheless, after the efforts by the department, collectively with efforts by universities including Vanderbilt and other professional societies, associations, and industry, Congress ended up the funding 3 hubs at $22 million each. The ones that are in bold and underlined are the ones that will be funded. We'd spent a lot of work really pressing on the hubs this year. The feeling among the higher ed community in Washington was that this was a huge opportunity, that we needed to support Secretary Chu and his vision, and that it was a great opportunity to really increase substantially energy research. We contacted Senator Alexander pretty early on and engaged with him quite extensively on this. As you may know, Senator Alexander had issued his 7 grand challenges about a year and a half ago or so, and he was very quick to note that the proposed energy hub topic areas are fairly similar to his 7 grand challenges. So he was in fact very supportive of the hubs. This is an excerpt of a statement that he delivered on the Senate floor earlier this summer in support of the hubs. And he, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, obviously is a player on this. However, he is just one senator and is in the minority at that. So unfortunately, his influence is somewhat limited, but I think that he is committed to expanding the hubs both in terms of dollar amount and in terms of numbers in future years. There was a copy of this out on the table as well, but this was a slide presented at a meeting that I was at earlier this year from Pat Damer in the Office of Science, and this was her interpretation of the differences between energy hubs, the EFRCs, and ARPAE. And I'm not going to go into all of the details of this, but there were copies out there. If anyone did not get one, I'm happy to send that to you separately. One of the other priorities and new programs put forth by the Secretary in the FY10 budget was a program called ReEnergize, Regaining Our Science and Engineering Edge. And this was a comprehensive K-20 science and engineering initiative with a goal to jumpstart the development of a clean energy economy, and goes, I think, a great deal towards one of the points raised in the National Science Board report in terms of workforce development. The funding proposed was $115 million, with $80 million specifically targeted to higher education. The $35 million for K-12 was to support technical training programs and new energy-related efforts, K-12 and community colleges. The higher education component was proposed to support 200 3-year graduate fellowships, 200 postdocs, 1,000 undergraduate assistantships for summer projects and continued study, and 4 interdisciplinary master's programs in clean energy. Unfortunately, despite strong advocacy by AAU, Vanderbilt, other universities, coalitions, groups, etc., did not get any funding in the final appropriations bill. The House included, out of the 115 requested, I believe the House included $7 million and the Senate included nothing. Again, this is, I think, partially a victim of the department not having all of the personnel in place and perhaps underestimating the need, even though it's a Democratic Congress and a Democratic administration, that just because what the administration requests is not always what the appropriators are going to provide. So the other big component, obviously, that's been taking up a lot of our time is energy and climate change legislation. Healthcare has obviously dominated a lot of the news attention and what's been going on, and certainly the motto in Washington has been, if it's not healthcare, it's not moving, which largely is true with the exception of energy and climate change. It's gotten a little bit more traction than other priorities. However, the reality is that the year is winding down. Copenhagen is fast approaching, and lest we forget, we're only about a year away from the midterm elections. So it's very unclear at the moment what sort of final energy package we might see. I would hazard a guess that we will not see a final package this year. We might see, we do have a final House bill, we might see a final Senate bill this year, and depending on how politics plays out, we might see a conference agreement and final bill sometime next year. So what's in the House and the Senate energy and climate bills? As I think everyone is aware, the basic idea is we need to limit our greenhouse gas emissions. What the Democrats have proposed is creating a cap-and-trade system, which is included in both bills. The idea is that polluters would be allowed to sell or trade their permits or allowances to others for their use. The House bill, H.R. 2454, came out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is chaired by Henry Waxman from California. Chairman Waxman made a number of, a long list of deals with other committee chairmen to prevent the bill from having to go through the other committees of jurisdiction. The result was a politically expedient bill with no shortage of giveaways to various industries and groups. It squeaked by just before the July 4th recess by a very narrow vote, 219 to 212. In the Tennessee delegation, Congressman Davis and Congressman Tanner joined the 4 of our congressional Republicans in opposing the bill. The other 3 of our Democrats did support the bill. With respect to research, Vanderbilt and the broader higher education community has really stayed away from advocating one way or another on cap and trade. We'll let other people fight that. What our focus has really been on is trying to increase the funding for energy research within whatever vehicle is moving. The House bill included 1.5% of the allocations to be set aside for energy research. Certainly was appreciated that we got a small nod, but the reality is that that is nowhere near the amount of funding that we were seeking or that is really needed if we are to try and move away from some of the energy sources that we're using now. So on to the Senate. There are 6 Senate committees that share jurisdiction of the Energy Climate Bill. The lead one right now is the Environment and Public Works Committee. The Energy and Natural Resources Committee passed a bill earlier this year that will likely be wrapped up into the Environment bill. That bill was introduced 1733 at the end of September. So the university community has put together a proposal that would seek to set aside 7% of the emissions allowances to establish an independent energy and technology fund that would direct money towards research deemed most important to meeting the emissions goals set forth in the legislation. We got some additional details on the Senate bill late on Friday, and thanks largely to the advocacy work of some of my colleagues in Washington, as well as the leadership of Senator Frank Lautenberg from New Jersey, the Senate bill calls for sizable investments in energy research over the next few years. It would set aside 4% of the distributed allowances in 2012 and 2013, 2% in 2014 and 2015, and 1.7% in subsequent years. We are estimating that each allowance is worth approximately $600 million. So in 2012 and 2013, we're talking about $2.4 billion in energy research funding. This funding could be used at so-called clean energy research innovation centers, as well as it would likely be directed through ARPAE. It's certainly less than what we had been proposing, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, and it's a pretty sizable increase. The Environment Committee is starting a series of hearings today. Today they were hearing from Secretary Chu, among others, and those hearings are expected to continue throughout the week, and markup could be before Thanksgiving. So just sort of to wrap up, this was what the higher ed community, what we've been advocating for, has largely been based on the Clean Energy Technology Fund that the President has called for, which was $15 billion over 10 years. We've been advocating 7% of the allowances, totaling about $5 billion a year, be allocated for research. Funds would be used for competitive research in the sorts of areas that are listed below there. It's very much a work in progress. We're a long ways away from a final product, but I think it's safe to say that the Washington-based higher ed community associations and other coalitions and advocacy groups are very much engaged in the process of trying to secure significant investments in energy research. It's clear that this is going to be a field for the future, and we want to make sure that if we are trying to get to these goals set forth in these bills, that we have the basic research funding in order to get there. So with that, I will close and happy to take questions. We'll let Ryan speak, and then Dean Galloway, then we'll get to you.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about kind of where we're going at the state level and why I think that matters to you all, particularly here at a university like Vanderbilt, who has a strong legacy of being able to conduct high-level research. And I think that's going to be something that as we continue to move forward towards a clean energy economy, that will pay some untold dividends for the state. I would say we have been working hard on this space, the clean energy space, really for the last 2 years. The governor is, by background, a Harvard-trained physicist. He's a scientist before he was a healthcare exec, before he was the mayor. He started as a physicist, and so he's a scientist at heart. In conversations with folks like Tom Mason, who's the lab director at Oak Ridge National Lab, or Stephanie Burns, who's the CEO of Dow Chemical, or any of those other companies we've been working with, he goes from the normal level of conversation that you would expect a governor to have to in-depth, high-level chemical engineering, physics talk in about 3.5 seconds. And while the rest of us just sit on the side of the table and just kind of nod our heads and wait until it comes back down to where we can get it. But like I said, we've really been working on this for a while. We have a good story to tell in Tennessee. It's something that we're certainly taking advantage of right now. We have a history of clean energy innovation that stretches back to the New Deal and TVA and bringing East Tennessee and turning on the lights in East Tennessee, essentially bringing East Tennessee in a lot of ways out of the third world. Going through World War II and Oak Ridge and the Manhattan Project. Full disclosure, I'm from Oak Ridge. I do glow in the dark. But and then stretching on forward to TVA's nuclear legacy as well. As a state, we get about 36% of our power from nuclear on a good year. That's the most of any state in the country. So we have some pretty good markers down from a legacy standpoint. We have a really unique and dynamic set of partners as well between public side of things, private side of things. I mean, we boast probably the national lab at Oak Ridge that is on probably the steepest trajectory as far as the amount of stuff that's coming into its portfolio. I think that matters a lot for you all that are sitting here today with an interest in clean energy research and climate change. Their unique resources like the Spallation Neutron Source, the supercomputing capability, the Center for Advanced Manufacturing, all of those are resources that only exist in Tennessee. You all are just a few hours down the road. I would encourage you, to the extent that you already are working with ORNL on a lot of things, to strengthen those relationships as much as you can. Their trajectory within the DOE lab universe is very steep right now. They're receiving a lot of funding. Some of it was touched on earlier. I think they're in line to get some others through some of this Innovation Hub money that I'll talk about in just a little bit. We've also had some big wins in the last year. Hemlock Semiconductor, Wacker Chemie, two multi-billion-dollar investments that are polycrystalline silicon manufacturers. They're number 1 and number 2 in the world. That matters a lot for the state as we continue to grow the solar value chain. We went from not necessarily being known as a clean energy state to showing up on a lot of reports. Pew released a report earlier this year that stopped it stretched from 2001 to 2005, or 2007. On their time frame, we were one of only 3 states that had large clean energy sectors that were fast growing, with the state of Washington and the state of Colorado. So in that respect, we were better than California in a report about this, which was pretty exciting. But those game-changing wins are going to matter. What's kind of driven out of this has been a state economic recruitment strategy that's kind of pushing all of our chips to the middle of the table. It's no secret that our automotive sector has been pretty severely impacted in the state. As the second or third largest automotive manufacturing state in the country, we've taken a pretty hard hit. Outside of Michigan, we have the most number of counties that are auto impacted from an unemployment standpoint under the Department of Labor statistics. At the state level, we see this clean energy space. And when I say clean energy, I mean everything from renewables to biofuels to efficiency to nuclear, kind of clean coal, the whole gamut of things. Is something that we are uniquely positioned to do very well on, to leverage our business climate, which is considered second to none from the publications that rank it. Site Selection Magazine, again, this year said we had the best, most competitive business climate in the country. We have smart incentives. We've worked hard to create a good business climate, and we're investing in our workforce. I'm going to talk a little bit more about green jobs in a second, but that's certainly something that I think we are, at the state level, doing a lot to move the ball forward as quickly as we can. We've defined the sector. One of the things that the dean mentioned earlier is that you have to define it, and we've very clearly said in Tennessee, this is what, when we say clean energy sector, this is what it means. We put that in statute. We've made investments in the clean energy space eligible for the emerging industry tax credit, and we're trying to focus on companies where we see the real value, R&D, innovation, commercialization, and market transformation. A few of from a policy standpoint, two things that I kind of want to highlight just briefly. Starting in 2007, the governor really early 2008, the governor kicked off a task force on energy policy. This is similar to many of the other task force policy groups that other governors across the country have done. Really focused on 4 areas: what can state government do to lead by example with our buildings and our fleet. That followed up some work from an alternative fuels task force that the governor also led. But going back to the energy policy task force, how do we improve residential efficiency? Per capita, those of us sitting in this room use more electricity on a per capita basis than any other state in the country. Tennesseans as a whole do that, and so that's the nature of a lot of things. One, the all-electric house that TVA has promoted: reliable, affordable, cheap electricity, and and bad building stock. I mean, there's just it's a cultural standpoint, and there are a variety of things. But so we use a lot. We use probably more on a per capita basis than we need. So that was one of the real strong areas of focus of the task force. And then the final 2, which I think are most important to this group. What can we do to continue to build on and leverage the growth in our clean energy sector? And then what can we do to expand the production and use of renewable energy in the state? 2 things that kind of are linked together, but that we see offering a tremendous amount of economic growth in the future. So the governor released during the legislative session last year, and it was passed towards the end, what we call the Clean Energy Future Act. It mirrored the 4 things on the left of the screen, with kind of recommendations that kind of came out for each of those on the right. I won't spend a whole lot of time in that going through those, because I really want to highlight some of the Recovery Act opportunities that I think are really the most exciting. These would be the 2. Under the state has received about a little over $100 million of Recovery Act funding. The largest chunk of that was $62.5 million. What the governor has proposed doing, and this is money from the U.S. Department of Energy, is what we're calling the Volunteer State Solar Initiative. A 2-part initiative that is unlike anything else that any other governor in the country proposed. Again, kind of thinking, the governor likes to do things at scale. He doesn't have a lot of patience for what I'd call hobby programs. He wants to create big transformational wins. And so this is what we chose. This is how we decided to invest some of our state resources. Tennessee Solar Institute. This is something new that we're going to be creating in partnership with the University of Tennessee and Oak Ridge National Lab. I certainly think that there are abilities for other people to join in this venture. But we envision it to become the solar center of excellence in the country. Remember, the governor's a physicist. The example he uses is he wants it to be the Bell Labs of solar innovation. That where all of the activity related to market transformation, the next generation breakthroughs of research and development, whether it's affordability or durability or storage, whether it's improving just the whole value chain across the solar value chain. That he wants that to occur in Tennessee. And so the Solar Institute, if you kind of go back to those innovation hub concepts, think of that. This potentially, we hope, is some seed money to do that. The state has a pretty good experience doing that already with biofuels, where the governor invested about $75 million of state funding to create cellulosic ethanol partnership in East Tennessee. That was leveraged then with $135 million to create the Bioenergy Science Center at Oak Ridge National Lab. And we're hopeful, I guess is probably the best way to say it, that this similar investment will be able to serve as a good marker, a good anchor, create some gravity and pull other things towards us. And so you have the Solar Institute and the West Tennessee Solar Farm that's gotten some press. You may have seen it in the last few months. It'll be a 5-megawatt solar farm in West Tennessee. That'll be the largest on TVA's grid, and will effectively increase the amount of solar that is on Tennessee's electrical grid by 15 times. So we're pretty excited about that. The state is also a partner in a multi-stakeholder award to deploy electric vehicles with Nissan. That was a Nissan and E-Tech-led proposal. We are playing in rarefied air in Tennessee's case with California, with Washington, with Oregon, and with Arizona, Phoenix, Seattle, San Diego, Portland, and the other one's escaping me. But those are states and cities that Nashville and Knoxville and Chattanooga aren't very often compared with in this clean energy space. And so that's another real exciting thing with Nissan just being down the road. I should note that Vanderbilt has been part of some discussions from very early on with Nissan about how we can deploy electric vehicle infrastructure in Tennessee. I certainly think that looking at the grid interaction between electric vehicles and what that may do to the grid and how those can be improved from an efficiency standpoint is something that is going to be a good area of focus. A few other things I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. I pulled this slide deck from another presentation that I'd given a few weeks ago. But there's other money coming into this. One of the things I did want to highlight is green jobs. The state is actively working on some green jobs activities related through our Department of Labor. About a week and a half ago, the state submitted what I think is a $5.5 million energy sector partnership application, essentially that says, take the Council on Competitiveness recommendations that says everybody has to play in the same sandbox a little bit more strategically. Let's focus on what really matters for the state. Let's reposition the whole workforce system from pre-K through 12 to higher education, to community colleges, universities, technology centers. Everybody needs to be looking at some of the same things, and then what can we do to get there. So all of this is great, and I guess this is a few of the wrap-up points that I want to make. But why does it matter? I mean, the Hemlock and Walker announcements, those are $1 billion investments, about 2,000 jobs. Those are two major anchors. Tennessee's already home to Sharp Solar in Memphis, which assembles more solar panels in Memphis than any other single facility in North America. We have the largest producer of flat glass in Upper East Tennessee. We have other companies across the solar value chain. We have companies in biofuels, renewables, company in Alston Power in Chattanooga, which is GE's #1 worldwide global competitor in the eco-imagination space, the power side of things, the high efficiency turbines and boilers. So we have a lot of anchors. So these jobs they're real, they're here today. It's something that we are actively trying to recruit. From an internal standpoint, we don't see economic development and environmental sustainability mutually exclusive. Our other big $1 billion project in the last year was Volkswagen, and they made it no secret when they located in Chattanooga. They located partially there because they thought it felt right. They liked Chattanooga's commitment to sustainability and moving forward from the environment. That they stated that was a shared value, and the CEO of VW talks about it as a gut feeling that they made. They made $1.5 billion investment partly because of a gut feeling that felt right. We think that the early adopters are going to be the big winners. That we put some markers down, that we get out ahead, and that we start to pull, service place where people are going to want to come locate their facilities. And I certainly think that we're going to need help from across the value chain. Obviously, when we talk a lot, just because of the state's partnership with Oak Ridge from UT and Battelle co-managing the lab, that I often say, UT and East Tennessee, I think there's obviously a role for an institution like Vanderbilt. In my opinion, you all have some of the best and the brightest that can help us on this march moving forward. This is my one chart. I don't think you can talk about energy without putting up at least one. And so this is a pretty good one. So worldwide energy consumption is projected to increase by 50% by 2030. This is EIA information. And I stole this slide shamelessly from Dr. Tom Mason, who's the lab director at ORNL. But I think as you look at that gets back to 4 reasons for clean energy. The Dean mentioned earlier about some debate around climate change. When I give this slide, I usually start with this one and say, okay, well, if we can agree on this one, then we're going to agree on the last 3 for sure. But I certainly think that as you move forward as the nation moves forward with climate policy, that even if we don't agree on this one, I think that we can all agree on this one. I think we should all agree on this one. But the climate is changing. The world's going to be a different place if we're not going to do something about it. But these other 3, I think if you get 3 out of 4, you're not going to get anybody when you're talking about this that doesn't agree with the other ones. Energy assurance. If there's going to be 50% more consumed, how do we make sure that we can keep our lights on? There is a strong argument about being able to make sure we produce our own fuels at home, that they're clean, that that we're not having to rely on stuff that's from somewhere else. National security. This is one that I've started putting in this slide more recently. On a per capita basis, the South as a region sends more sons and daughters, uncles and aunts and uncles, mothers and fathers, nieces and nephews, brothers and sisters into the armed forces on a per capita basis than any other region in the country, and it isn't even close. And so if you assume that, that there's going to be resource shortages in the future, we don't want sons and daughters and grandchildren mitigating these international disputes around the world. So there really is a national security argument to it. And then the economic development jobs piece. These jobs are real. We are, as a state, positioned to really be a winner in this. Commissioner Kisber and the governor have been out to California talking with the VC crowd, everybody from the folks at Kleiner Perkins and others, really the top tier of the VC clean tech space. And they say that we are, obviously California is so far out in front, but we are right at that next tier with Massachusetts and with Colorado and some places that Oregon and Washington that we don't usually get thought of. So we're working hard. Let me just wrap up and say, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. That was my last slide. So I'll be happy to take some questions when we sit down, and look forward to answering those. Thanks.